The press room was buzzing with anticipation. Reporters shuffled in their seats, cameras clicked into position, and the murmur of voices filled the air. It was another day in the world of politics, another press conference where questions would fly like arrows, searching for a weak spot. At the center of it all stood Karoline Leavitt. Young, confident, and unwavering, she had become a rising star in conservative politics. Her sharp wit and no-nonsense approach had earned her both admiration and fierce opposition. And today, she was about to make headlines once again. Among the reporters was an atheist journalist known for his relentless questioning of faith in politics. He had a reputation for pushing back against religious beliefs in public discourse, often challenging those who spoke openly about their faith. Today, he had his sights set on Karoline. The moment arrived. He raised his hand, and when called upon, he stood up with the confidence of someone ready to make a point. His voice carried a sharp edge as he spoke. "Miss Leavitt, you often speak about faith as if it has a place in government. But isn't it dangerous to base policies on religious beliefs rather than reason and logic? After all, we are a nation built on the separation of church and state." A hush fell over the room. Other reporters leaned in slightly, sensing the tension. Some smirked, expecting Karoline to stumble or deliver a rehearsed political answer. But she didn't flinch. She met the journalist's gaze, her expression calm and composed. Then she smiled, not a defensive smile, not an angry one, but the kind that said she had been waiting for this question. "That's an interesting point," she said, her voice steady. "But let me ask you something. Do you believe in absolute morality?" The journalist blinked, caught off guard. "I believe in ethics, in human-decided principles that ensure fairness and justice." Karoline nodded. "All right, so who decides what is fair and just? You? Me? The government?" The journalist hesitated. "Society as a whole. Laws evolve as we do." Karoline's smile deepened. "Exactly. And that's why faith matters. Because if morality is just a shifting standard, then nothing is truly right or wrong. It's just a matter of opinion. But if morality is rooted in something higher, something beyond human flaws and changing cultural trends, then we have a foundation that stands the test of time." The room was silent now. Cameras zoomed in, reporters exchanged glances. She continued, "America wasn't built on faith being excluded from public life. It was built on the principle that government should never force religion upon anyone, but it also shouldn't strip it away from those who find guidance in it. Our founding fathers believed that rights come from our Creator, not the government. That's not just religious talk, that's written in our founding documents." The journalist opened his mouth, but Karoline wasn't done. "You argue for reason and logic, but tell me, how do you logically explain why human life has value? Why do we defend the weak? Why do we believe in justice? If everything is just random chaos, why does any of it matter?" The journalist swallowed, searching for words. Karoline leaned forward slightly. "The truth is, whether you believe in God or not, the principles that shape this nation, freedom, dignity, human rights, all stem from the idea that we are more than just accidents of nature. That's why faith still matters, and that's why I won't apologize for speaking about it." The room was still. Then slowly, a few people began nodding. Some reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads, realizing they had just witnessed a moment that would go viral within hours. The journalist, for all his sharp wit and usual confidence, had no immediate rebuttal. For the first time in his career, he found himself at a loss for words. Karoline stood tall, her expression unwavering. "Next question?" she asked. And just like that, America had witnessed a response that would be talked about for years to come. The tension in the room hadn't faded. Reporters who were usually eager to fire off the next question hesitated, still processing what had just happened. The journalist, known for his relentless questioning, had been left speechless, not by hostility, not by avoidance, but by a response so deeply rooted in logic and conviction that it dismantled his argument before he could even counter it. But Karoline wasn't one to gloat. She remained composed, standing tall, scanning the room. For the next question, she knew how this worked. There would be backlash, there would be articles twisting her words. But she also knew that truth had power. A new reporter finally spoke up. This one, a woman from a major news network, tried to steer the conversation in a different direction. "Miss Leavitt," she began, "many Americans believe that faith should be a private matter, separate from political discussions. Given how diverse this country is, don't you think it's divisive to bring religion into the public sphere?" Karoline turned her attention to her, taking a moment before responding. "I think it's important to recognize that faith is already deeply woven into the fabric of this nation," she said. "When our leaders are sworn into office, they place their hands on a Bible. Our currency says, 'In God we trust.' Our founding documents state that our rights are endowed by our Creator. That's not about forcing religion on anyone. That's about recognizing that faith has always played a role in shaping our moral framework." The reporter nodded but wasn't ready to back down. "But wouldn't you agree that not all Americans share that belief?" "Of course," Karoline replied, her tone respectful. "And that's the beauty of freedom. No one is forced to believe in God. But we also shouldn't force people to hide their faith just because it makes some uncomfortable. The First Amendment protects both freedom of religion and freedom from religion. But it doesn't mean faith has to be erased from public life altogether." There was a murmur in the room. A few reporters exchanged glances. They were beginning to realize that every time they tried to back her into a corner, she only emerged stronger. Then another voice, this time from the back of the room. A different journalist, older and more seasoned, leaned forward with curiosity rather than combativeness. "Miss Leavitt, you've spoken passionately about faith and its role in public life. But let me ask you something on a personal level. Why does this matter to you so much?" A moment of silence stretched between them. For the first time, Karoline's expression softened. This wasn't a question meant to trap her. It was genuine. She took a deep breath. "Because I've seen what happens when people lose hope," she said. "I've seen families struggle. I've seen people battle darkness. And I've seen how faith gives them strength to keep going. I talk about faith because it's not just a political issue. It's a human issue. When everything else crumbles, when governments fail, when economies crash, when personal hardships come, what's left? What keeps people going?" She let the question linger, letting them think about it. For millions of Americans, the answer is faith. And I will never apologize for defending something that gives people hope. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't because people were caught off guard. It was because they were listening. The atheist journalist, still seated near the front, finally shifted in his chair. He cleared his throat, speaking quieter this time. "I may not agree with you," he admitted, "but I respect your conviction." Karoline met his gaze, nodding. "That's all I ask." And with that, the press conference continued. But outside those doors, the world was already watching. The clip of Karoline's exchange would soon flood social media, sparking debates, discussions, and headlines. Some would attack her, some would praise her, but one thing was certain: she had left America speechless. As the press conference wrapped up, Karoline stepped away from the podium, knowing full well that the moment would live far beyond this room. The cameras had captured every word, and within minutes, news outlets would be dissecting her response. She walked down the hall, her team close behind, but her mind was still in the room. She had spent years preparing for moments like this, knowing that every word she spoke would either strengthen or weaken her message. By the time she reached her office, her phone was already buzzing. A text from a close friend: "You just shook the country." A message from a supporter: "That was the most powerful defense of faith I've ever heard. Thank you." A headline flashing across her notifications: "Karoline Leavitt takes on atheist journalist and wins." She exhaled, setting her phone down It wasn't about winning, it never had been. It was about standing firm in her beliefs, about showing people that faith and reason weren't enemies but allies. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. Her communications director peeked in, looking half excited, half exhausted. "You should see Twitter," he said. "Some people are furious, but a lot of people—" He hesitated, then grinned. "A lot of people are inspired." Karoline leaned back in her chair, nodding. She had expected backlash, she always did. But she had also expected something else. Truth had a way of breaking through. That night, as she scrolled through the reactions, she saw something that stopped her cold. The atheist journalist, had tweeted something unexpected. "I don't agree with Karoline Leavitt on faith, but today she made me think. And that's something we don't see enough of anymore." She stared at the words, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She hadn't set out to silence him in the way people might have expected. She hadn't humiliated him, shouted him down, or dismissed his views. She had answered him with conviction, with logic, with a belief so deeply rooted that it couldn't be shaken. And in doing so, she hadn't just silenced him. She had made him listen. That was the real victory. Not just for her, but for the millions watching who now felt a little less alone in their faith. The next morning, the ripple effects of the exchange were undeniable. News networks were running the clip on repeat, panelists debating Karoline's words with equal parts admiration and outrage. Social media was ablaze with reaction videos, think pieces, and countless discussions. Some headlines were predictable. Karoline Leavitt pushes dangerous religious agenda in press conference. Others, however, told a different story. Leavitt's response to atheist journalist sparks nationwide debate on faith and morality. And then there were the ones she hadn't expected. Even non-believers admit Karoline Leavitt made a powerful case for faith. She knew that in today's world, people rarely change their minds overnight. But she also knew that planting a seed, making people think, was sometimes more powerful than outright conversion. As she walked into her office, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but she answered anyway. "Miss Leavitt?" a voice asked. It was a man, his tone hesitant. "Yes, this is Karoline. I don't mean to take up your time, but I watched your press conference yesterday," he said. I don't really know where I stand on faith. I've always been skeptical, but the way you spoke, it made me question some things." She could hear the emotion in his voice. This wasn't a political stunt. This was a man wrestling with something real. "I guess what I'm asking is, how do you know it's real?" he asked. "How do you believe so strongly?" Karoline sat down, letting the question settle. "Because I've seen what happens without it," she said gently. "And because every time I've felt lost, faith has been the one thing that brought me back." The line was silent for a moment. Then, a quiet, "Thank you." As the call ended, Karoline leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. This was why she did it. Not for the headlines, not for the political victories, but for the people searching for something more. That day, she didn't just continue with business as usual. She took time to respond to messages, to engage with people who had real questions. The journalist she had debated, he had posted another message. "I still don't believe, but I respect the conversation. Maybe we need more of them." Karoline smiled. One conversation at a time, one moment of truth, one nation searching for answers, and maybe, just maybe, beginning to find them. As the days passed, the conversation Karoline had ignited refused to fade. News segments continued dissecting her words, and social media remained divided. Some critics labeled her a religious zealot, claiming she was pushing faith onto a secular nation. Others applauded her for standing firm in a world that often shied away from discussing deeper truths. But beyond the media frenzy, something else was happening. Karoline's inbox flooded with messages, not just from supporters, but from skeptics, seekers, and even self-proclaimed atheists who found themselves questioning things they had long dismissed. One email stood out. Miss Leavitt, I've been an atheist my whole life. I always believed that faith was just a crutch, something people used when they couldn't handle reality. But when you answered that journalist's question, you didn't argue like a politician. You spoke like someone who truly believes. It wasn't about forcing religion onto others. It was about explaining why faith matters. I don't know if I believe in God, but for the first time, I want to find out. Thank you for making me think. Karoline read the message twice, then a third time. She had expected backlash. She had expected resistance. What she hadn't expected was this, a shift, however small, in the hearts of people who had once been unwilling to listen. One night, she received an unexpected call from a well-known pastor. He had seen the press conference and he wanted her to know something. People don't always need to be convinced, he said. Sometimes they just need to hear the right words at the right time. You gave them that. His words stayed with her. She wasn't trying to convert the nation. She wasn't trying to impose her beliefs on anyone. She was simply refusing to be silent about what she knew to be true. And truth, when spoken with conviction, had a way of reaching even the most unexpected places. Weeks later, during another press briefing, a different journalist, this time one who had been silent during the last exchange, raised his hand. Miss Leavitt, he began, his tone measured. After your recent comments about faith, there's been an increase in discussions about morality and religion in politics. Do you believe America is losing its faith? Karoline took a deep breath. I believe America is searching, she said. Some people have walked away from faith, but that doesn't mean they've stopped looking for meaning. You see it in the rise of anxiety, depression, loneliness. People are longing for something more. The question isn't whether America has lost faith. The question is whether we'll have the courage to find it again. The room was silent. The cameras rolled. And once again, the nation was listening. In the days that followed, Karoline's words sparked yet another wave of discussion. News analysts, podcasters, and even pastors dissected her statement. America isn't losing faith, it's searching for it. Some commentators agreed, citing statistics about declining church attendance but a growing interest in spirituality. Others dismissed her remarks, insisting that faith was outdated and unnecessary in modern society. But Karoline wasn't interested in winning arguments. She was interested in truth. One evening, as she reviewed upcoming events on her schedule, a staff member walked into her office. You're getting a lot of event invitations, he said, setting a stack of papers on her desk. Faith-based conferences, universities, even a few secular debate forums. People want to hear more from you. Karoline flipped through the invitations. Some were expected, conservative gatherings, Christian organizations. But others surprised her. A well-known Atheist forum had invited her to speak. A liberal university known for its secular stance had extended an offer for a discussion on faith and morality. She set the papers down and looked up at her staff member. These are the people who usually ignore or mock discussions about faith, she said. Why now? He smiled. Because whether they admit it or not, they're starting to realize something. Karoline tilted her head. And what's that? That faith isn't the enemy of reason, he said. And you just might be the first person in a long time to make them see that. That night, as she sat alone with her thoughts, she reflected on how much had changed in just a short time. She had gone from answering a single pointed question at a press conference to leading a national conversation. She wasn't sure where it would all lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't stop speaking the truth. Not now.